Ja.
Destijds of nu?
And for those watching, the audio is just off.
Let's start. Can you hear me all like this? Is that okay?
Microphone.
Wait, yeah? We need to. Okay. Yeah?
Ja.
I took it. Okay, let's start, I said. A warm welcome to you all here in this wonderful room. And it's very good to see you all. And some of you I met last year in Vienna, precisely 1 year ago, I think. So it's, I think it's wonderful that we meet again today. It's an honor to welcome you. My name is Lonneke van den Hoonhout and I'm the Managing Director of ILIA LGBT Heritage. We talked about lesbian history last year. Evin, Chavez, Eva and me, we had the honor to start the first, I think the first talks with a history panel, and that was impressive. I think what I liked most was that we were the older generation, I think, and it was a room full with younger people that were amazed, impressed, and surprised by this, well, unique history we talked about. So I'm glad that it continues, that we are still having all these attention for our history, and ILIA is already working on it for 40 years now. We are having our 40th anniversary this year. So since '78, and we merged later on with several lesbian archives. So we have a lot of collections that reflects on lesbian lives. And within the collections, there are a lot of materials, like not only paper, but also buttons and t-shirts. And if you want to know more about that, we have one of our colleagues here, Connie van Gils, and she is working with all these special, very precious materials. That is very important to look back at your history and where it comes from. And all these materials tell the stories. And not only in paper, but also in photos, in videos, and in, for example, sound. We have these very rare cassettes, but I'm sure they work, but they are so vulnerable that we need to digitize them soon, very soon. We need to digitize everything in, well, whatever the next 100 years, I think. But it is a lot, so we start with the most vulnerable materials. I think I like to give the word to one of our interns because she can tell more about her research, and it illustrates why we think at ILIA why keeping our history alive means also researching our history. So, Nina, welcome here, and I give you the mic. When you're finished, I want it for just one word. I want it back. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Nina Little. I'm intern here at ILIA. And for ILIA, I research the lesbian separatist movements of the 1970s and 1980s in the Netherlands. And I've read in the ILIS booklet that accompanies this event that one of the aims of studying the history of ILIS is to look at the challenges and the successes of the international lesbian organizing in the past, and to learn and find inspiration from the near 2 decades worth of experience. The Lesbian Nation, a lesbian separatist organization in the Netherlands, can be somewhat related to that, as this is the group that was responsible for the organizing of the first large gay demonstration in the Netherlands in 1977. They demonstrated against Anita Bryant's anti-gay campaign in the US. And after 1977, this became a yearly event, which is called the Roze Zaterdag or the Pink Saturday nowadays. This is only a small aspect of what I will be studying. I will be analyzing the lesbian separatist ideology, which was largely inspired by American text. And I will additionally look at how this ideology was adapted to and fitted within the Dutch context. Moreover, I'm interested in how the separatist ideology went together with their activism, because for instance the 1977 demonstration was not a women-only event. So I'm interested in how that went together, a separatist ideology and maybe not so separatist activism. I'm still somewhat at the start of my research, and I'm currently reading ideological text upon which these Dutch women base themselves. And I'm very interested in discovering the international context of lesbian activism, which will be discussed this evening. And if anyone would like to know more about lesbian separatism or has advice for me to take into account for my research, I would be very willing to hear it. And that's all I had to say. So.
Thank you, Nina. Wonderful. Well, a last word. I'd like to thank all the women that are organizing this event, because I am honored to be the host, but actually you did all the work, so it's great, and I wish you a lot of success, and I wish you all a very nice evening with a nice drink afterwards. Have a lot of fun also. Thank you. Thank you, Ella. This is Joanna. You asked me to introduce you, so I forgot. Joanna, you are program manager at the women's. Well, you finish this. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So my name is Joanna, and indeed I'm a program manager, one of 4 at Women at Workplace Pride. Workplace Pride is this foundation. I actually have a presentation. So what Workplace Pride does, actually we're concerned with the workplace. So initially Workplace Pride was an umbrella organization for different networks of companies. They extended, and now it's 52 members over academia, public, private sector. So we run so the Workplace Pride was actually founded already in 2006. So for 12 years now, we've been existing. actually the way it works, the 3.5 million employees that we count all the employees, right, of different member organizations. But if you count in a conservative manner of 6% of LGBT employees, this is actually a very big number. So this is our constituency, and out of these, we concerned with women. So our Women Workplace Pride program started 2 years ago, and why we started it? Again, talking about separatism, right? So many of us, we've been active in these professional networks, and we noticed that whenever we go to events, almost only men. And we're wondering why this happens, why women don't want to go to events, LGBT events. So we decided that we're going to form a program for women, and this event is one of the events that we've been organizing for the last 2 years. So we focused on actually creating role models and visibility. We really think that makes a difference. When we are visible and out at work or in a society, it really creates a different kind of dynamics. When you're out, then at work, then also women who maybe are not out yet, it's much easier for them to come out and also, you know, create this visibility in the workplace. Sometimes it's hard because people are, it's a very heteronormative environment. I work in IT, so not only that I'm very often the only woman in the room, only foreigner, sometimes there are more foreigners, but, and the only lesbian. It's not always fun. So that's why we have this work. Sometimes it is fun. Okay, I wanted in the context of this event about lesbian organizing, I look back at what we have learned actually throughout this last 2 years. So we learned that actually it's very important to stay visible, because what women tend to do when we have mixed organization, gay and lesbian organizations, is that women do all the work and they do all the, you know, the technical setup and organizing, and then not even in the picture because they're taking this picture. So we changed that, and now it's also important for basically for our history, because this is how also we create this narrative that we've been there, we've been around for a long time. We also learned that it's important to keep it doable whenever you organize. You always have very great plans, especially me, and then it's very hard to execute them. So we learned to really keep it doable, even if it's a very small event and it's small key, you think it's small, but it really makes a difference. And then it's really important when we talk about now the young generation, older generation, we need to pay it forward. You actually need to seek out people who are going to carry on the work, because you know not always will be able to. We have different events in our life. Sometimes we can dedicate more time to activism, sometimes less. It's really important to find this other person who will do it maybe a bit differently, maybe better, and that's why we'll get this continuity, because also one of the themes, since you will see in this event, will be sustainability of the movement. Actually, why this event happened? Yes, I was initiating this event, but so many people contributed to it. So when last year I was in this European Lesbian Conference in Vienna, and I learned about her story, what you're going to hear about. And I didn't know about this. And I consider myself a very informed, activist, involved, lesbian person, and I didn't know. And I felt really actually ripped off my history, my heritage. So I felt like, no, we need to bring it out, we need to publish it. Because also, I remember the lady on the far right, she's organizing the Lesbian Lives Conference, it's an academic conference in Brighton for 23 years. And what she said in this conference is basically that it's also a form of oppression to deny certain minority group their place in history. That we're being told that we don't create culture, that we only consume, and therefore we don't feel the continuity of our identity, our group. And this is not true. We have been creating independent culture and politics for decades, and we need to reclaim it. We need to also actively take it out, put it on a pedestal, and remember about it. We can contest it. We don't have to identify with everything that was said before. But it's an amazing feeling to actually be part of this movement and keep creating it. So thank you very much. It was so. If you want to stay in touch with us, the contact details. And now I will introduce our moderator, Martha McDavid-Pugh. She is very accomplished. She's the founder of the Law of Exiles Foundation, which led a successful effort to change the US immigration law to include LGBT partners. This is just the beginning. She's a board member of the ING Bank's LGBT network. And she's also one of the managers, program managers of Women in the Workplace Pride. But she's also an elected member of the US Democratic National Committee. And she chairs the Democrats Abroad Global LGBT Caucus. Martha McDavid-Pugh.
Thank you, Joanna. Well, it's great to be here today, and I'm really honored to be invited to moderate the panel. So I want to invite our two panelists to come on up and take a seat, and I will introduce them. So Belinda and Evie, please come. It's so terrific to have history represented here in this panel. And you know, I asked myself, well, where do we start? Do we start like with the past, like the work that's been done by Belinda to look back at the history, or do we start with like the future, with where we're going? So I think we're going to kind of like time travel and go back and forth a little bit. But let me first introduce the panelists. So Belinda, further away, she was a research intern with Ilya here from February until April of this year. And at that time, she researched the history of the International Lesbian Information Service. She worked for a year and a half at the European Commission and is currently working at ILGA Europe in Brussels. Passionate about LGBT rights and European affairs, she has a master's degree in gender studies from Utrecht University and a bachelor's in French and Spanish from Durham University in the UK. So also very accomplished. Welcome, Belinda. And then Evine. In 1980, she joined the women's collective Interpot, which organized the first lesbian conference ever in Amsterdam for the International Lesbian Information Secretariat. So the study of history and participation in historic events is represented here. From then, she stayed involved in both the ILA Secretariat and ILGA's Women's Secretariat here in Amsterdam, and she participated in many international gay and lesbian conferences, plenary sessions at many of them, and in 1982 she coordinated the Dutch demonstration in support of Elaine Morrison, who was on a hunger strike in protest of suspension from her job. In last October, when we were all in Vienna at the ELC conference, she participated in the history panel and spoke on the forgotten history of ILIS. In 2018, she became a board member of the ELC, the European Lesbian Conference. So welcome both of you, and Belinda. So, you know, like I said, we're going to try time travel a little bit, and I want to give each of our panelists some time to tell a little bit, both Belinda about her work and Naveen to tell about all the wonderful things she's been involved in. You know, we could flip a coin and decide, like, do we start, where do we start? Yeah, Belinda, go right ahead.
Probably just some, yeah, go ahead. because I have all the kind of empirical, less, well, quite interesting but less kind of personal information, and then Aline will fill it with her personal experience. So thank you all for coming. It's super nice that so many people are interested in this event and interested in the history of the International Lesbian Information Service. I say service because originally it was, as Aline said, was originally the Secretariat, but then after 2 years they changed the name to service. So I also just want to thank Aline for all of her help with the research process. I think it was quite difficult just using the archive, although the archive has a lot of information. And also Aline reached out to a number of her former activist colleagues. So I also want to thank Asta Iversen, Eva Isaacson, Paula Baqueta, and Agnes Liu. Because they filled in the gaps in terms of the location and dates and groups of the conferences with their personal archives and archives of their memories. I'm going to try and skip it goes. Yeah. So this is a map that you see on the front of your booklet. Also, big thank you for Tara Nielsen for creating this really beautiful graphic. Originally, should be here. Originally, I made a very basic kind of Canva timeline, but I'm actually going to use that because then you might be more likely to be able to follow it because it's chronological. So we'll just kind of keep that up while I speak, and maybe you can spot the various different conferences as I talk about them. So, yes, actually that booklet is online, so if you want to download this image as well, you can look at the current online one and download that before we upload the new one online. So it's on the ILIA's website. So just a bit of background, of course, we've mentioned that I was asked to do this research at ILIA, and I did it between February and April of this year. And originally, Vienna 2017 European Lesbian Conference was regarded as the first one, but then obviously the organisers quickly found out this wasn't the case. And so the first one was at the end of 1980 in Amsterdam, and 76 women attended from 17 countries. ILIS was created. The second EGA conference in Barcelona in 1980, so earlier in the year, and EGA was the International Gay Association, which is now known as ILGA, which is the International LGBTI Association, although it doesn't have all of the acronym in its name. But yes, obviously IGA, before it became ILGA, and then before they changed their kind of sub-name to the LGBTI, was indicative of the problems that women had with EGA at the time. So not enough space was created for lesbian issues. So ILIS created itself within EGA, but only actually separated from EGA the following year in the 1981 April conference in Turin, in Italy. So the Secretariat then went from the Women's Secretariat in EGA to Amsterdam with Interpot, which was the International Women's Section of CLC Nederland. ILIS held meetings, conferences, and published newsletters between twice and 4 times a year. The Secretariat in Amsterdam under Interpot published what was called the Cheap Stencil Service until the Secretariat moved in 1982 to Helsinki. And in Helsinki, Eva Isaacson, who was one of the panelists at the history panel at the European Lesbian Conference last year, she was the main person running the ILIS Secretariat in Helsinki and publishing the ILIS newsletter. Then in 1984 it went to Oslo. 1985 to 1986 it went to Geneva, run by Vanille Fraisse, and then back to Amsterdam until 1998. So the 3 largest conferences, so the role, you'll see in the booklet as well, the role of the Secretariat was to publish the newsletters, communicate between the various members across Europe, and help organize conferences. The largest conferences, and this is bearing in mind that this was the early 80s until the late 90s, and even when the internet became available, this wasn't something that ILIS could use. They didn't have emails, they didn't have internet, all of their communication was just writing letters and I think phone calls, I mean, and a lot of kind of pen pal stuff with their newsletters and announcement of actions and announcements of situations. So then Eliane Morrison's action, that was all over the ILIS newsletters that I found in Elia's archive. So the largest conference was in 1986 in Geneva, and there were 700 women from 23 countries. And because of the scale of this, this actually was what led to the creation of the Latin American and Asian regional network. So you can see that near the end of the timeline, there's a lot more on Asian and Latin American conferences, which was supported by ILIS. The second largest was 1991 in Barcelona, and there were 350 women from 10 European countries. And also they provided scholarships for 20 black lesbians and lesbians of color to attend. And after that conference, there was the creation of the Sami subgroup and newsletter. And the subgroup was, all of the subgroups were created when Interpot was running the secretariat. So the subgroups all met in Amsterdam, and they were mostly people based, I believe, in the Netherlands. And the third largest was 1983, so actually one of the first conferences, which was run by Miel, which is a Mouvement d'Information et d'Expression des Lesbiennes, and there were 221 women from 20 countries. So after they split from IGA in Turin in 1981, overall there were 9 further conferences. So you had the first one, Turin, and then 9 more. I'm just going to list them briefly, you can probably follow as well. Lichtaert in Belgium, over New Year of 1982. Sheffield in the UK, September 1982. Paris in April 1983. And then over the New Year of 1984, there was an Amsterdam action meeting, so it wasn't really a conference, but they brought together 2 people from each national organization that participated in ILIS. So around 50 people went together, and it was focused purely on actions, because normally in conferences you have more discussion, working out what the issues are, and then maybe you move on to planning actions. But this one was very much a drive to get on with doing some actions. And then in 1984, in the springtime, there was a conference in Stockholm, in Cologne in April 1985, Geneva March 1986, Amsterdam August 1988, and Barcelona March 1991. Their final newsletter was actually in 1998, so about 7 years after their final conference, their final European conference. So as far as I could gather from the research I did, the reason why they stopped doing conferences is they kind of slowly burnt out. It was spread too thin, and I think they were focusing a lot on supporting the Latin American and Asian conferences, so those organizations. And so I believe that the success of Geneva led to this ability to create regional networks in Asia, Latin America, and for ILIS to support them. And therefore, before 1998, there were actually 3 Latin American lesbian conferences and 3 Asian lesbian conferences. So in Latin America, there was one in October 1987 in Mexico City, to which 250 lesbians attended, and also some representatives from ILIS went there as well, and I believe helped with some workshops, but the information in ILIS archive is not as complete concerning these more regional conferences. Costa Rica in April 1990, 70 lesbians attended, and also ILIS, some members. Puerto Rico in August 1992, unfortunately, I didn't, in the booklet you'll see I don't have so much information in terms of the organization and the number of people who attended, because ILIS actually didn't attend. So all I know is that it took place, because the US didn't grant visas to the members of the ILIS subgroup that wanted to go. And then the Asian lesbian conferences were mainly run by something called the Asian Lesbian Network, which was pretty successful as far as I can gather, because you can actually see a lot more online about them, so I think that they continued on into the 2000s probably. And they had their first conference in Bangkok in Thailand in December 1990, and there were 80 people from 11 Asian countries. Then the second in Tokyo in Japan, May 1992, with 170 people from 13 countries. And then Wulai, Taiwan in August 1995, with 140 people from 8 countries. Yes, and so you can find a lot more information about ALN online, whereas ILIS and the Latin American conferences are less traceable. Something very important, and I think it contributed to the success, a more international scope of Ines was their attendance at 3 UN World Conferences on Women. The first one was attended by Heidi Muller. She went in 1980 to Copenhagen, Denmark. So that was after Ines was created, but before it split from EGO, and she went on her own initiative. And then the second one was particularly successful in Nairobi, in Kenya, in July 1985. Sylvia Boren and Ricky Bartels went, and apparently they had daily meetings with between 50 and 100 lesbians attending from Kenya, Zimbabwe, Uganda, South Africa, Mexico, France, Puerto Rico, Spain, India, New Zealand, Australia, the US, UK, Peru. This is what it said in their reports on their trip, which is a lot of different countries. And actually, the Geneva conference happened a year later, so in a way, this action in Nairobi meant that more people came to the following conference, and then meant that there were more people willing to create regional networks. So in this way, these two women from Ines created a kind of knock-on effect of lesbian conferences around the world. And then the third was 10 years later in Beijing, China, 1995. It was actually the last Ines gathering of any kind, I believe, on an international scale. And they, by then, were well known enough to get their own lesbian tent at the NGO Forum. And the people who attended were Isabel Perez, Jose Mas, Jenny Nipa, and Shelly Anderson. Just to finish off, the things that struck me the most about doing the research was that Ines had some pretty impressive theory, was well grounded in theory, as you're discovering with your research. The lesbians were well read. And they had a very impressive intersectional approach. And when they came across issues, they really published those complaints in newsletters and then tried to work on them for the following conference. Also, worth looking in I didn't put all of the things I found from the archive in the booklet as regards national organising, but I put some in there because it really amazed me. So I was meant to be researching Ines. I also saw a lot of information about lesbian organising in various individual countries on the national level. That has been going on since maybe the 60s, definitely the 70s. And there's a lot of impressive stuff, like summer camps all the time. Various different types of lesbians. You have Jewish lesbian gatherings, Black lesbian gatherings, Christian lesbians, you have bisexuals, you know, from each country had different conferences like this. There was also a group called Gemma in the UK, which was Lesbians with Disabilities group. And then there was, Yugoslavia was like a great example of, and yeah, Leka Mladenovic was speaking about the lesbian activism in Yugoslavia before the Berlin Wall. And that was super impressive. And also, Ines organised that people sent information about lesbians and whatever, yeah, basically information about lesbians to people on the other side of the curtain through, you know, luggage things. So when you have various activists traveling for personal reasons, then also take some Ines propaganda. So yeah, and my main sources were the ILIA archives, of course, and there's I learned a lot about the importance of archiving, because none of it's online on like a website. You can definitely ask, for example, ask Monica afterwards if you want to look into the archive. You can see, because all of the things I saw were on the ILIA digital collection, but then the actual newsletters are in hard copy. But it's not the kind of thing that you can just do a quick Google and find. So, but yeah, this is the importance of digitizing, so you can definitely ask Monica if you want to take a look at some of it. It's quite easy to find. I also had to contact the Cologne archives to find information about, you know, organizing groups of Cologne conference. And then I went through newsletters, IGA and ILGA newsletters, and the Eastern European Information Pool. And yeah, I was very, very grateful to have been asked to do this research. It really opened my eyes, not only to the history of the lesbian movement in Europe, but also to the importance of retrieving our history. Yeah, and I didn't have internet email, that really amazes me. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
No future without past, and I'll move between ELC, ELC in my story. Let's get back in time, like 1 year ago, it's already been mentioned. Exactly today, this morning, I spoke about this history. It was a conference where 500 plus women came together in Vienna from 44 countries. And they attended the ELC to act, reflect, transform, and connect. And we did all that, as you can see in the slideshow later on, or you have already seen actually. Maybe it gets repeated, I don't know. After 20 years of non-activism, when I came to Vienna, I got into a kind of beehive. I got to know lots of fabulous women. There was art, film, yoga, and even a cruising workshop. I discovered an entire new vocabulary. I noticed there is so much more going on for lesbians today on all levels. For instance, groups like Work Pride were not even thinkable in the past. ELC presented a brief report on lesbian lives in Europe, that is, parts of Europe, focusing on discrimination and health. There were activities all over the place going on, and there are activities going on all over the place now all over Europe. Yet also, I noticed many women felt that our space is shrinking, and what we have available today did not create itself out of thin air, of course. It was realized over the years by growing and building our movement. We have to maintain and sustain what we've achieved in the past. I was surprised when I got to know that ELC started with the women during an ILGA conference in Nicosia. Feeling the need to have a platform and structure of their own. My reason for coming to the conference was to be part of the history panel at the start of the conference. I'm not a historian though, so how did I get here? About a year and a half ago, I stumbled over a tweet, very much by accident. It said, First European Lesbian Conference in Vienna, October 2017. I was so surprised, I reacted almost immediately and tweeted this was not true, as the first one was at the end of December 1980. I actually didn't even think about a possible reaction, but I got one. How do you know? And even more interest. We emailed, and I had a Skype session with 2 members of the ELC board. This was all amazing to me because we didn't have it in the past, of course. They invited me to the conference to tell about the forgotten history of ILS. Why is this important? New technology gets us much closer and better connected than we were in ILS days. And if it were not for this technology, I would never have participated or even know, I wouldn't have known about the ELC. And surprise at the conference, nobody really knew about ILS, but still, in the meantime, lesbian life had moved on and changed big time to what we did. So what did we do with ILS, and how did we get to where we are today? Let's go back in time. When I was a student and just discovered I'm a lesbian, I lived in a student's home. One of my friends was gay, and he went to a conference of the International Gay Association. It took place in Barcelona in 1980, and he came back very enthusiastically. The women there had held a women's caucus, and they decided they needed more time and space to discuss their own issues. Recognize anything? So the women from Amsterdam were asked to organize a conference between Christmas and New Year, that same year, 1980. My friend told me that they needed more people to get the job done. I went to see if it was something for me. I like international stuff. I like speaking other languages and meeting people. So there was ending up organizing a lesbian conference without even being out yet. Before I knew it, I went to an ILGA conference with 60 gay men and a handful of lesbians. Yet I managed to fall in love. Still, the need for us women to organize ourselves showed clearly. We had no experience with organizing conferences and started from scratch, asking advice from others on what to do and what not to do. One example, get your contracts in writing. We did. We rented a youth hostel with space for 200 people to sleep. We were 84, and this is a different number, so maybe yours is more correct than mine, I don't know. It's what I found in my notes. As you probably know, Amsterdam floods with tourists between Christmas and New Year. And soon people came knocking on the door of the youth hostel. The guys in charge wanted to open up for them, and we were not amused. And it took us a lot of time and hard work to keep the place just for ourselves. The men from our work group of volunteers, because we worked with the men mixed and separately and all the combinations you can imagine, they did the babysitting and the cooking for us while we were having our discussions, workshops and plenary sessions. We had a great conference with lots of life, love and laughter. We worked hard on sexuality, SM, media, family, children, political action, structure and organization of ILIS, etc. We again needed more time to discuss our ideas and get more organized. So we asked the women from Italy. I forgot to show the picture from the Amsterdam conference. So we asked the women from Italy, because the next conference of ILGA would take place at Easter in '81, and we thought it would be a good idea to meet just before the ILGA conference. The women organized a conference in 3 months. They did an amazing job and got over 200 women together, 140 from Italy and the rest from the rest of Europe. They also got grants for 7 professional translators. The conference took place in the Women's House of Turin. So the 200 of us had to walk to a restaurant for lunch. People in the streets thought we were having a demonstration. You can see it on the top left. The session I recall most is the final plenary session, especially the last part about the structure of ILIS. We had a long and emotional discussion about the future of ILIS and its secretariat. Many Italian lesbians work with women-only groups and were separatists. They didn't want ILIS to be part of a mixed organization. We discussed several different possibilities. As a secretariat, we wanted to keep participating in ILGA, but we didn't succeed in convincing the mostly Italian women who precisely did not want that. So in the end, it was decided that ILIS would be totally autonomous and independent from ILGA. However, as a group, we, women from Amsterdam, and many women from other European countries, wanted to keep working both within ILIS as well as within ILGA. There was another problem. As we had at the secretariat were from a mixed organization, we were distrusted. And so was the ILGA, and so was our own Dutch organization, because it was all so mixed. Most women didn't want to be part of that and didn't like the idea that the secretariat would be hosted by a mixed organization. They didn't have our experience with babysitting men and cooking for us. So they didn't trust us with the secretariat. We were actually overwhelmed with what to us looked like a tsunami of Italian women who seemed angry with us. And that's the picture in the middle, more or less, and how overwhelmed we were, you can see in the top right. We felt we had to fight to to even keep the secretariat with us. As rational Dutchies, we were used to different ways of having a discussion. We were used to compromising, whereas the women from the South started from ideology, theory, and they were passionate and did not avoid conflict. The final decision at that session was that we had groups taking part only in this, groups taking part in ILGA, and groups belonging to both organizations. However, that was not a solution for the secretariat, and there was no other group available. In the end, we somehow got to the point where we were allowed to continue the secretariat for IBIS on the condition of transferring it as soon as possible. As you heard before, what Belinda said, it took a few years. At the same time, we still continued performing as the Women's Secretariat at ILGA. We had quite a complicated structure at Interpol, actually, because within our group we had women working mixed, working both, or working only on IBIS. So that was the same as international. However, when I look back now, I guess that this conflict is partly due to different experiences the Italian lesbians had with men and mixed organizations. We, on the other hand, were used to a formally organized situation based on pragmatic solutions and cooperation, discussing till you get an agreement versus getting the conflict out and then see how you find a solution. Afterwards, we found out Italians got together nationally for the first time at this conference. Only last year, while preparing for my presentation at ELC, I discovered a letter in the archive of the ILIA that stated that they were totally overwhelmed by our level of organization. I believe all of this has contributed to the culture clash that took place during that last plenary session. Next, going to the ILGA conference in Turin showed some of the problems for the Italian women. It was really a great culture shock for us who just came from the ILIS conference with very basic accommodation. We came from basic accommodation to a horribly luxurious hotel, very expensive, including swimming pool, luxurious meals, etc. Too much too expensive for many women to be able to afford their participation. We just smuggled some of the women in. Our adventures continued at the next ILIS conference, which took us to Lichtenberg in Belgium, again between Christmas and New Year. Here we tried to coordinate an international action for Eliane Morrison's, a Belgian teacher who was suspended because she openly declared she's lesbian on the radio. The idea was to support her internationally during her hunger strike. There were different views on her situation. Some even didn't consider it a case of discrimination based on sexual orientation. I got to chair the plenary session with an English co-chair. During the plenary, the discussion got quite heated. Half the women spoke English, half the women spoke French. Translation got eliminated by the speed and intensity of the discussion. Both parties didn't communicate with each other anymore. My co-chair gave up. At a certain point, the discussion threatened to get out of hand, and I didn't know what to do anymore. So what I said was, I don't know what to do anymore, and it shows in the picture. Eva took this picture. It really shows my desperation. However, it's a moment I am proud of because I learned so much from it. We took a break and then resumed to find a solution, which was that groups that wanted to support her with their actions would do so under the umbrella of ILIS. And those that did not agree would just not participate. Anyways, the attention to her situation in surrounding countries resulted in more publicity in Belgium, where the issue had been ignored till that moment by the media. So this was really a big result for us, that through all the pressure from Belgium, France, from the Netherlands, France, Germany, etc., helped the actions in Belgium itself. In my view, respecting each other's position and giving each other the opportunity and space to work according to our own styles towards a shared goal was essential, and it still is, of course. These themes and experiences are just a few examples that have been recurring over the years in conferences, which I will not tell about here. Even though I have mostly described our struggles, I would like to emphasize how important these are, because so much can be learned from them. From here, I'm going to make a jump in time back to ELC again. I believe those who set up the ELC and the Vienna conference did a great job. It had an amazing atmosphere and covered so many different aspects of lesbian life and activism. One of the things that became clear was that we forgot our history. At the same time, it was a starting point for retrieving our history through having the history panel. Also, the conference itself will be the starting point of a new strong lesbian movement in Europe and Central Asia, I'm convinced. What I also see, however, is that several of the issues we encountered in the past still recur on all levels of the organization. And other organizations as well, of course. These are good enough, we struggle on how to be more inclusive, for instance. In the board, we have, in the board we are working on a structure that's really flat and innovative, and at times we have frictions. These are good, as they allow us to see where we need to change and improve. It actually sharpens our vision, I guess. One resource I feel would be very helpful is what Edith had in the past. It was a manual for lesbians on how to organize themselves without burning out. We called it the Lesbian Cookbook because apart from Europe we were distributing it in Latin America, where the use of the word lesbian was not safe. Getting it across borders might have been difficult as well, because the women were presenting it, traveling through Latin America, visiting the lesbian groups, and speaking about the booklet. Its lessons are still valid and valuable today. It's here in the archive, but unfortunately it's not accessible yet. I hope it will be digitized soon. I don't know, but I'm looking at you. And anyways, those that are in Amsterdam, I recommend that they have a look at it if they can. It was also clear during the conference in Vienna that in too many ways we are invisible. In the board, we're working among others on the creation of a network for Europe and Central Asia. We need to join our forces more to achieve the ideals we have for ourselves. And that's why I want to invite you to go to the next conference that will take place in Kiev, Ukraine, from April 12th till 14th in 2019. Let's retrieve our history and cook some action for the future in Kiev. Building a momentous lesbian movement. Let's bring lesbian genius to the world. You're all invited. Paidion.
Okay, thank you, Evine, thank you both. So we wanted to have a bit of a panel discussion and ask some questions. And I'm sure that all of you, after hearing these stories, have had your imagination tickled and will have questions about all this amazing history that we're hearing about. But I just want to kick off with with a couple questions for either of you, so whoever wants to pick this up. And Evian, you mentioned just now that you were talking about a lot of challenges and struggles and so forth. But I think there's probably also a lot to learn from Elis. Can you share a little bit some of your thoughts on that? I mean, I know we don't have all week, but maybe a couple of top points.
Well, I think it's very important to take into account the different cultures that you meet when you meet internationally, but also between organizations. And one of the things and that's very dangerous because somewhere on the line you discover that you might even have opposite visions or you skip some phases. And I think that's what happened, what caused lots of conflict and friction during the years that that we had conferences with Elis.
Yeah, thanks, very well, yeah. So I also hear in that challenging our assumptions, like we think things are a certain way, and one of the reasons we come together as lesbians is to find out how things really are, you know, for ourselves and for others. Yeah, really terrific. And you know, another question I have is, what are some of the themes that were there back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s that are still relevant today? Either of you want to say? I mean, Belinda, what do you see for yourself?
Well, I wrote a lot about this in the booklet. So I think, yeah, in the booklet, most of the themes that I wrote that were recurring, and I put them in bold, and then I wrote a little bit about them. They were the ones that struck me as being the most relevant. There are plenty of themes that are similar. So there's, you know, in each of the conferences, you usually had workshops that involve, for example, rural lesbians or lesbian motherhood. They are recurring, and I think, and also aging lesbians is also increasingly, I think, as far as I know, there's definitely an aging population in the UK, so that's also important. But the main ones I put in were, for example, combating fascism, racism. I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head. There was quite a lot written and also discussed, so written in the newsletters after conferences where there had been some issues regarding racism within the movement and inaccessibility of locations, not only just, you know, physically inaccessible, but, you know, audiovisual issues. I think recurring themes, I wrote down here some buzzwords that I call them buzzwords because there are some phrases used in the conference workshop reports that are still kind of recurring today. So there's a quote here from the 1990 newsletter, so it was presumably after an 88 workshop, I'm not sure which, but it says, racism equals power plus prejudice. People of color can be prejudiced, they can prejudge white people, but this is not racism. In other words, there is no such thing as reverse racism. So reverse racism is something, as a young person at the moment, I hear being bandied around a lot. So I thought it was interesting that this was in this 1990 workshop report. There's another one on fascism where in the I think it was 1985 Cologne conference, there were quite a few, there was a small amount of people, there were about 40 or 50 people at this conference. So I think they did a lot more action work, and they had a 3-day workshop on how to combat fascism. And the action theory is actually in the booklet, there's a couple of images of it. But one of the sentences was, telling us to die is not freedom of speech. Again, really, really relevant at the moment with freedom of speech as an excuse for various hate speech. Also, scapegoating of a kind of Western imports. So there was issues, I think, when Elis were describing the myths about lesbians. They said the first myth is that we simply do not exist. The second myth is that if we do exist, we are a white Western import. And again, I think that's another argument used around the world as regards LGBTI activism. Then, yeah, of course, there was the disability, and I've got a bunch of best practice examples, but I don't want to go on too long on this question. I mean, I can try, and I'll see if I can summarize. Something you can learn from this is
they were sharing in the newsletters. They were sharing books and publications on all of these kind of issues. So there was a lot of theory being shared. They organised actions, protests. They boycotted. They also had pen pals. And there's a very popular Instagram account at the moment called Personals, which is basically like a modern day version of doing pen pals, which is something you can learn. So you can see that could be very popular. And ELC could think of doing similar things. You never know. You had a workshop somewhere like that. And then creating space for marginalized groups within the lesbian community, and encouraging people to do their own research. And something that I found interesting is that when Ines was working on combating racism, they were also making links between fascism, fascism, anti-Semitism, and actually classism. So they did a lot. They gave a lot of space for people lesbians of color and lesbians from a working class background, and they published also literature that was written by these two minority groups. So that's interesting. I think class is still quite often sidelined in LGBTI activism. So that's also very interesting that we're doing this in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I'll pass it back now.
So I'm wondering, because all of you have your own experiences with the past, the present, and the future, are there questions for our panelists or comments?
Thank you for the event and for sharing your experiences and your research. I wanted to ask about the character of the conferences. All right. I wanted to ask about the conferences, like kind of to get a better picture of what kind of conferences they were, because I'm more used to academic feminist conferences, but also mixed academic and activist conferences. And I was just curious, was it mainly activist conferences or also academic theoretical? Would you have like thematic panels, or were conferences also thematic, or all those things, like also to get a sense of what kind of people participated and what kind of tensions maybe also were, because you talked before about tensions between different cultures and nationalities, but besides from that, so that would be my question.
Yeah, we had mainly activists at the conferences. I'm actually quite surprised at the way the ELC was organized, because there were many lectures and it was like people presenting their research. I never experienced that during either an ILIS or an ILGA conference. So that was totally new to me. And it was, small group, big groups, getting together, planning actions, finding strategies to help their actions and improve our lives in general, and creating space. So it was also legal action, and these things were that was, I think, a bit influenced by the fact that Interpol was here in Amsterdam, that also ILGA started as a Northwestern European organization, used to formal stuff. Actually, one of the founders was a lawyer and human rights defender of the IGA, and so that has influenced the movement a lot. And I think coming from ILGA as ILIS started, the secretariat, that was our way of thinking. At least that's where how I saw it when I started working there. But then we met, for instance, in the southern and south of Europe. The women were much more into ideology, and that kind of caused some friction with our pragmatism. We wanted to get things done, and that was really one of the bigger problems for ILIS, because how do you stay in touch between conferences? I think the high frequency of the conferences at the start helped quite a lot, but I know that later on, one of complaints was that in between conferences, nothing was happening. You didn't hear that much. Phone was terribly expensive. Letters were slow. Snail mail, as we would call it now. Somebody actually asked me last year, how did you meet? How did you know when to get together? Where? Well, we had letters and we did have phone. So we could call each other. But we had a fixed date, the first Sunday of the month at 1 o'clock at the COC every month. And then year-end conferences, that would be more frequently, but we would know. And we would make the appointment ahead. So that kind of thing was, yeah. Now I see the difference. You just WhatsApp or whatever means you use. And hey, I'm in the neighborhood of, are you here too? And you get the meeting. So that's a big difference. Being able to have meetings with Skype. With the EDIS board, we have Skype meetings. We have work groups, we have email, we have the Facebook group. So there's lots of means of communication. And that keeps the fire burning. And it creates many more possibilities on other subjects as well.
Could I say something about that?
Yeah, about the contact that people can have through digital social networks and digital contact, it's not available for a lot of women either because they live in rural developing countries or they live in countries where the political climate is not safe right now. I myself have been traveling for 9 years, so I spent about half of my time in Asia, and even trying to find a gay bar or something, like the websites are blocked, everything is being monitored, and I see over the years that people are actually getting back into their houses more and not being able to be visible in a safe space. Look at Russia, for example. So we should also be very careful not to take it for granted that everybody has that.
That's certainly true. But it has made the movements in those countries more creative as well. And I'm not into the details, but I know that they have like safe networks on the internet also. And so that's, there are ways to work around that as well. Although I'm not, I don't know the details exactly.
Other questions?
Okay. Belinda, you wrote in the booklet that ILIS wasn't quite successful in doing something tangible for lesbians with disabilities. And I was wondering maybe if you know, how does the ELC today work with that issue? Is there more, yeah.
Yeah, that's still an issue, but there, ELC is working on it. I think Eva Isaacson, she's deaf, and she was able to get a fund from her government to be able to assist the conference. So there are more possibilities for that now, but it's something that we take into account when we choose a facility where we have the meetings. But yeah, still lessons to be learned as well.
Interestingly, there were 3 people who were relatively regularly writing in ILIS newsletters about the kind of problem here with the disability and the access. And one of them was Eva Isaacson, so you can see how history is kind of repeating with that. So there's still something else we can work on.
Thanks.
Another question? Francesca. Ah, over there, great. That's romantic.
Hey, so thank you, first of all. I'm Italian, well, I'm an Italian lesbian to be precise. So I was really interested in the part about the conference in Italy. And I'm well aware about the Italian lesbian movement is extremely separatist. It still is, at the extent at which now many young lesbians don't really feel connected to that anymore. And I kind of know the cultural elements behind this separatism because, yeah, culturally I relate to them. But I'm really interested to get your outsider perspective on what you thought were the main factors that led Italian lesbians to be so separatist.
I'm not into the details of that, but yeah, Italy is a, what do you call it, machista country. So that's part of not wanting to work in mixed groups. But I don't know why. I'm not quite sure how far you or what your description of separatism would be now, because for us it meant at that time working separately from the gay man.
Yeah.
And yeah, we saw what happened between the two conferences. One was very basic, very low budget, and the other one was total luxury. So if you look at that, probably financial difference very big as well. So that, yeah, that's the only things that I can more or less comment on, because I don't know all the details of the lesbian groups at that time.
I guess we could also ask, why were other countries less separatist? Why were women and men working together inside of organizations, or why was there a different relationship in other places?
Well, it's in the Netherlands, you might refer to the polder model. Even though for women in COC it was still a struggle. I mean, we were a minority. Our group was nice, but also I once went to a secretariat's meeting for ILGA with 2 men, 2 women, and we were the only women at that secretariat's meeting of about 10 people. We would say something, they would not react. One of the men would repeat what we said, and then came the reaction. So even in a mixed organization, it's tough. And I know, for instance, Eva was very much supported by her organization in Finland. But at the moment that the AIDS epidemic started, all the funds would go there, and she was not able to go to the conference anymore. So even though at the beginning they were kind of open for lesbians, then the practical problem, a big issue of course, changed all that, or changed the practicality of how to work. And yeah, I think the culture is more maybe equal or more macho in the South, but that's a bit stereotypical as well. I'm not enough into the ideological or other details to be able to comment further.
Other questions, comments? Who's next?
Well, I have a remark. I think nowadays lesbian women in Holland are much stronger than they were, also by participated in the feminist organization. And I'm part of the Roze Stadsdorp, that's, how do you call it? A city village for gay people, gay and lesbian people, and that works terrific. It's mixed, and there's no problem in working together.
One of the things we heard is it's very hard to find files or recover our history. We also mentioned, at least in the paper time, you could keep it in a box and they magically end up in Ilia. So what can we do nowadays to we do a lot of things on Facebook, we create events and they're on Eventbrite, but what can we do to make sure that in 10 years' time, people don't have the same discussions like we had today? It's like, really? Something happened 10 years ago? Really? This was back in the 70s? So what can we do on a practical way to make sure that we keep our records? And maybe this is more towards Lonneke then, or maybe even you can answer. Or
I was under the impression that Ilya is starting to try to, or at least one of the methods of recording stuff online is taking screenshots and then just sending them to Ilya, but maybe I got that from someone else, I'm not sure.
There is a problem to keep the nowadays ways we publish, like websites and Facebook and even Twitter it's loads of information when we don't know how to collect it. And it's not only our problem, it's the problem of all the archives and libraries nowadays. So they are thinking about that a lot in, for example, the National Archives and the Koninklijke Bibliotheek. And we need to learn from them because we are the resources to find out ourselves. But I don't think that's the main question here. I think it's about generations and learning from each other and listening to each other. And I think every generation starts again. And we can't avoid that. It's obviously very important to read and to listen and to be willing to learn, but I don't think we can change that younger people need to start over again on their own way, and they learn from the older generations and they look into history, and then that's a nice start probably for your own life.
I think it's really important to try to, something that Joanna said at the beginning, involve younger people, next generations. And I think in the past those lines, so to speak, between generations have been broken. And if we somehow pay attention to keeping that connection with younger generations and younger generations with older generations, then the stories can be told and passed on. So that would be one method, of course. Publishing and getting the information out also is important, because I think, and that's something that's much easier now, is to, well, we're live streaming and people are seeing us overseas, literally, I know. So that's a thing that helps, and yeah, passing the information on, telling about what you did before when you're older, and when you're younger, asking what happened before.
I suppose it really highlights the importance of continuity, because even if you have a small group and you keep it going so that it goes through the generations and they have their own documents or their own archives, or an archive that they encourage people to go to, then that enables that continuity. But if you just have an archive but with no group to bring people in and keep it going so that people know where to look, then, because I didn't even know India existed until this year. So you need that kind of continuity group, so hopefully the cookbook will inspire the European Lesbian Conference on how not to burn out. And we can keep it going in the same way that ILGA has been going now for a very long time, like 40 years this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I will. Yeah, well, I would like to add a comment, just simply because I've been working in the area of women in information since 1998. And I had the pleasure of answering your question. I had the pleasure of going to the archive of the YWCA in Geneva. And if you want to have a concept of an archive, that started in 1848, and they only had ledgers, and people wrote down what happened in the meeting. They had one ledger and one set of notes on what happened in the meeting. Now what happened in the course, so they were very capable of archiving everything that happened up until the invention of the IBM typewriter. And from that moment on, there was copies of everything and everybody was circulating and nobody knew anymore what was original material and what wasn't original material. And so from that time on, they've been having their, how are we going to possibly archive, this incredible material from all over the world? Now, it comes back to one question: what is the essentially unique aspect of the material that you've got? And what you're saying there, Evine, is very important. What you've done is you've done some research into what did ILIS do, and in a way that's even more important because you're collecting information, you're thinking about it, you're working through it. At the time, ILIS was very important, but now it's important for somebody to bring that together and to make a publication on it. And I think this is the clue, and I think Ilya's doing a brilliant job of this, of finding the people, the places, the organisations in the past and what's important there and bringing new documentation, just sifting the information, because it will be impossible to document it. And so I think for Workplace Pride, Women at Workplace Pride, it's going to be really important to think about, what are the documents that we want to have going forward into the future. And that'll be a new set of documents.
Yes, and I'd like to add what I liked about the booklet is to read the story from a different point of view and seeing the analysis that Linda made. And it was, for me, although I have been part of this, and I should, you could say, know, it was, I really read new things, and because you looked at it with a different eye, and you took other information from it. So it's really interesting to do these analysis or to provide books about what's happened or whatever kind of publication about stuff that happened in the past, and not just in this, of course.
Other comments, questions? Yeah, one of the things I'm noticing, we have this question like, why don't we know our history and how do we collect it and all of that, right? How do we learn from the past, how do we take things forward? But, ELIS had conferences. Women came together over a whole number of years, and now we've got the European Lesbian Conference, so that's happening again. But I'm also just noticing here in the room, like this is actually where it's happening, right? This is where we're all going to take away what are our thoughts about the things that we care about, and what are the issues, and what are the moments that we want to save and record, and all those like piles and piles of files that we have on our computers, and photos, and whatever, that we like don't take the time to curate them and say, okay, this one, and that moment, and that person, and whatever. I don't want to lose those with my hard drive crowd. Just like we make sure that we, we're taking all of that with us, like what's the important things to record, so I think a lot of the place that this happens, like where we start to like represence our history and learn from it, is when we talk to each other, when we get together. So, thank you, Joanna, for coming up with the idea of actually doing that today, because I think we'll all go away with a lot that we've learned. We've learned a little bit about the history, right? There's just like the top of the iceberg, but there's probably so much that we could be learning about the past. And a fantastic opportunity to also come together next year in Kiev, which is really great.
Is there or will there be some kind of cloud service where people can upload stuff they found?
Will people be able to load?
Yeah,
upload
if
stuff?
Ilya will make some kind of cloud available, people can upload documents that they find in their attic and scan and just...
Yeah, I don't know how that works in terms of, how do you get your own files into an archive?
Monica, you donate them.
You donate.
Yeah, but like for now we collect digitally.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I think if you have a wish and if you have stuff that you think is really important, I think Ilya is the place that wants to know all about that.
We also collect the digitized files.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's digital born materials, and we also collect that. Yeah. It's all on the server.
Yeah, so people can contact
Ilya with their
Like every piece of
documents.
paper photo?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, really great. And I think for me, the invitation is also to kind of look through stuff. Because very often at the time something happens, the photo or the document, you know, do I keep it, do I throw it away? If you look at it 5 or 10 years later, it has like a huge, you know, either more significance, you go, well, you know, somebody else has done that, or that's already recorded or whatever, but to really like look through the stuff that we have and realize the importance of that. Yeah. Any final words on this conversation from our panelists, from anybody? There, the last word.
Sorry for me. I was kind of, I don't know, I had this impulse to say maybe we should focus less on how much we're going to preserve what we're doing. Let's focus on doing what we're doing. But of course, it's also not true because it's very important to also archive activism. But actually, what I wanted to ask is like, now we are talking, and to some extent it's true, as if lesbian activism started in 1980s. But I wanted to ask you, how was it when you started in 1980s with the conferences? Like, you also had some kind of a history of where you come from, and what kind of histories were those? Like, you know, yeah.
Just before Evie answers, I was saying that I don't know how old the archival material is, but there's not like on a national scale, there's so much stuff. Like I had to just pick a kind of time scale, and then eventually I went for the international scale. But there is a lot, and of course Evie knows more about that history person, so I'll pass it on to her.
There was a lot going on, but I think really trying to organize ourselves internationally was new. But there were festivals and there was art, whatever. There was a lesbian, the Her Story archives in New York. I once visited, and they had been working for a few years already. I don't know when they started exactly, but they must have started at least somewhere in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean it was a result of the whole, all of the cultural movements of the 70s.
It was a moment in time where things were bubbling and then coming together, and that gave way to the idea that we could organize internationally. I did see something about an earlier lesbian meeting, but I'm not sure whether it was local, regional, or whatever. But many things were going on.
Well, we've been live streaming this, but in light of keeping a record of this, let's make a group photo for those who want to be in this. So we have a photographer, we have a recorder here, so let's make sure we don't forget to record the whole group. If you don't want to be in it, step to the side, but I think we should make a group picture, right? And I know I'm taking over logistics now, so sorry about that, but I think we should.
Right. Just one thing, I would like to thank the organizers and all the public present here and public on the internet for their interest.
And I'm going to turn off the live stream.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.